All right. Well, let's get going. I'm Jason. I'm one of the founders of Nectar. We're a digital marketing agency with a focus on Amazon. We're an advanced Amazon advertising partner. Cover uh, basically how to use DSP to evolve your brand on Amazon today beyond the most basic tactics of retargeting. And I have here with me Harriet Carson, our VP of Advertising. I'll let her introduce herself. Thanks for joining us, though.
Yeah, hey everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Harriet Carson, VP of Advertising at Nectar. Today we're going to talk about something we've been seeing across Amazon for really the past few years. A lot of brands have really built sophisticated sponsored products programs and sponsored ads. They're investing more than ever. They're optimizing campaigns every week, expanding keywords, and yet growth starts to slow down. Natural reaction is to assume something's wrong, maybe bid need adjusting, maybe there needs more keywords. In many cases, that's not the problem. The reality is that search has its limits. So we're going to talk through how you can implement DSP to generate more growth.
Yeah. So we're going to kind of move through the different ways to use DSP. And this is really going to be tactical advice. Make sure to drop your questions in the chat. Um, and yeah, let us know. Yeah, ask as we go. Sorry, and we'll try to answer them in line, especially if they relate to like what we're talking about at the moment. If not, we'll double back to it. Um, so Harry, can you tell us kind of why brands need to really factor DSP into their media mix and strategy?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that to start, I really want everyone to leave today with the answers to three questions. The first is understanding why growth eventually slows, right? Even when you're increasing your budgets and sponsored products, we hear this all the time. We're spending more money every quarter. So why isn't revenue growing at the same rate? Second question is, how does DSP actually solve the problem? A lot of people know DSP exists. They're less clear on where it fits into an ad strategy or how it's different from sponsored ads. And then finally, the most important question I would say is, how do you know that DSP is actually working? Because, if you're investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in DSP, you shouldn't just know that it's generating sales. You should know whether it generates sales that wouldn't have happened otherwise, which can be a hard and a difficult question to answer, with attribution being a little bit more tricky. But we're gonna talk through why it's so important. The short answer is that sponsored ads captures existing demand, DSP creates net new demand.
So kind of diving into that first topic, why sponsored ads alone stop driving growth? Uh,
Yeah, so I would say this is one of the most important concepts that we will cover today. I think one of the biggest misconceptions that we see is that when sponsored ads start slowing down, again, you know, brands assume that something's wrong. However, what you need to think about is that there is a point of diminishing returns. Um, so think about, your own shopping behavior. By the time you search, let's say you're a small kitchen appliance company, by the time you are searching air fryer or like even like protein powder, whatever category it is, you've already kind of decided you're interested in buying one or a few. Sponsored products competes for the existing demand early on. That's incredibly effective. There are, thousands of shoppers that you haven't reached yet, though, and every additional ad dollar introduces your products to new people. But over time, something might change. As your ad program matures, you gradually capture more and more of the available search demand. Eventually, increasing budgets doesn't necessarily mean reaching more shoppers, and often means, competing harder for the exact same audiences, or you're seeing ROAS soften or CPCs increase, impression share becomes harder to grow. You can't really continue optimizing efficiently. At that point, the challenge isn't campaign execution, it's audience expansion. The next customer probably isn't searching yet. So that's where you really need to go to DSP and leverage all of the tools available to you to drive users to, either discover your brand or onto Amazon to eventually purchase.
yeah. So put together some markers of what saturation that indicate you're experiencing some level of saturation? Can you walk us through these?
Yeah, I would say that, saturation, it's a pattern that we've seen across hundreds of even like very mature Amazon accounts. Early on, advertising is incredibly effective. You increase spend and revenue grows almost proportionally. Eventually, though, that relationship changes. Each additional dollar produces a little less incremental return. That's what we call diminishing marginal returns, right? Importantly, this isn't a sign that sponsored ads have stopped working. It's actually evidence that your search program has become very effective and you're almost maxing it out. So you've already captured most of the people who are actively raising their hand and saying, I'm interested in buying from this category. The problem is simply that there aren't enough new searchers entering the market every day to sustain really the same growth forever. So instead of asking, how do I optimize search for another, 5% growth, the better question becomes, how do I create more people who will eventually search for my brand? That's where DSP really starts to enter the conversation. And yeah, these are just some metrics that are showing that you might want to invest in DSP if you're not already, and you're starting to see that search is slowing.
All
Yeah, and
right,
the
so
next, oh, go ahead.
so you start to I think what I hear from brands is a lot of them that are they've tried DSP in the past. They couldn't really interpret the results or didn't seem incremental to them. And I would say on one hand, there's better measurement tools today, namely Amazon Marketing Cloud, to really help you to interpret that that didn't exist a few years ago or weren't widely available. And then I think a lot of times people think, oh, DSP, like I have to go top of funnel and go really broad, but that's not the case. So obviously I have some examples here, but can you walk us through conceptually how brands should think about scaling DSP?
Yeah, and Jason, that's a really good point. DSP and sponsored ads, and we have a couple slides on this. They're not going to perform the same. They're completely different metrics to analyze to understand the success of both. If your next customer isn't actively searching, I think the question here is where do they come from, right? We generally think about three different customer pools. The first is competitor buyers. So users who are actively browsing competitors' product detail pages or buying from competitors but haven't interacted with your brand. These shoppers that are already purchasing products in your category, they're spending money today, they're simply spending it with someone else. Sponsored products has very few opportunities to influence those shoppers unless they decide to really search for your brand specifically, or you can conquest your competitors' product detail pages. Second group is lapsed customers. These are people who have already purchased from your brand before, but they haven't returned. Maybe they forgot about you, or maybe they purchased from a competitor during a promotion, or maybe they simply haven't needed to replenish yet. These customers are very, very valuable because they've already demonstrated trust in your brand. So re-engaging them is often much less expensive than acquiring someone completely new. And then the third group is really, category newcomers. So these are shoppers entering your category for the first time. They haven't formed, brand preferences yet. The brand that reaches them early often has meaningful advantage over, the long term. It can be a little bit more expensive to reach these users, but you want to get to them at really the early stage of the funnel here too. And also some of these category newcomers, you've created that demand by reaching them with very, very broad upper funnel audiences to, create interest and more demand for the brand. These three customer groups represent really the next stage of growth. The challenge is that, sponsored products, sponsored ads, it really wasn't designed to consistently reach them before they begin searching. And that's where DSP exists. One caveat is I typically would recommend building the funnel from the bottom up. So after you're maxing out search and you're seeing diminishing returns, test retargeting or loyalty on DSP, then test consideration, then test upper funnel. You don't want to go too broad at first, or you're going to see, you need to understand what's working before you're really spending a decent amount of budget. So going too broad, I've seen a lot of brands not move the needle. And that's where you can kind of I think that's where a lot of brands have sort of seen DSP not being as effective, where if you're taking a very targeted and very thoughtful approach, you're normally able to analyze early signals so that you're not spending too much budget on, campaigns that aren't moving users down the funnel.
Yeah, and I would also add that's a good point about how to kind of responsibly scale up DSP. When you start to move upper funnel, it takes longer because consumers are
Mhm.
becoming aware of you for the first time, and depending how broad you go, right? Like, so if you were to advertise on Prime Video on Thursday Night Football, you're getting in front of a bunch of people who are not even necessarily in category yet, or aren't even really in your target market. So it's going to take longer and more touch points to get people to convert. Whereas, bottom funnel, presumably they've been on your PDP before, for example, or have added a cart but not purchased. They're much closer to transacting. And then kind of to pair with that, if you're going to run upper funnel, depending on how broad you go, you may need a lot of budget to get enough saturation to move the needle. So if you start too early, you don't have the right budget, you might see very limited results, but still spend a meaningful amount of money. We've definitely talked brands out of running top of funnel tests because they haven't had enough budget to move the needle.
Yep. And DSP, I think it's important to note also that there's not like one fixed budget that's going to work for every brand. It's going to be different based off the category you're playing in, your market position, and it's really like a custom budget based off of your goals, the category, as well as we take into account P&L as well.
Yeah, and also it depends on your market penetration in general, right? If you're in every retailer and consumers know your brand, then you're going to have more success running top of the funnel. If you're a challenger, you're new, you're scaling, but you're you're not everywhere, you're going to have to rely more heavily on those ads to build that awareness, which means they're going to have to work harder for you and you have to run more. And I would also say, even at the bottom of the funnel, there's still a calculation of how many uh, glance views or sessions you're getting on your PDPs to how much budget you'll need to retarget that audience pool. That being said, I think generally if you can throw 3 to 5K a month at retargeting at a product month, it'll likely move the needle. Um, All right. So a lot of people don't even, I think, understand how DSP works, right? So search is pretty simple, right? A consumer puts in the keyword, hits enter, and then ads show up that are bidding on those uh, search terms. Um, can you take a step back and kind of walk us through how DSP works in the different formats?
Yeah, I would say when someone asks me to explain DSP, I normally would say, sponsored products buys keywords, as Jason said. DSP buys audiences, or sponsored ads captures existing demand. DSP creates net new demand. I will say sponsored ads can capture net new demand too. Like if you're going after broad non-branded terms, this is just generally speaking. You know, I would say that's really a big mindset shift, though. Instead of waiting for someone to search, we're identifying the types of shoppers that we want to influence, regardless of where they might happen to be. Maybe they're browsing Amazon, maybe they're looking at a competitor's product detail page, they might be just watching Amazon Prime Video and have characteristics of users we want to target or that are in our target audience. They might be reading an article on another website. Amazon has an incredible amount of shopping behavior about us, and DSP allows advertisers to use those shopping signals to reach customers much earlier in the buying journey than sponsored ads ever could. That's what makes it such a powerful complement to search advertising. Amazon has so much audience data, real purchase data from real customers, and also extreme reach, over 86% of US households. So make sure you're utilizing that data to really build brand equity and interest to drive downstream conversions. I will say, 5 years ago, most brands could get away with a search strategy without DSP. That is changing. You really need DSP implemented in your strategy to really see long-term growth. Most brands are doing it today. So yeah.
Yeah, and we've kind of covered here that DSP kind of unlocks larger audience pools. I think what's really fun and exciting about where we're at now is the addition of the Amazon Marketing Cloud that really allows you to marry your search strategy with your DSP strategy, whereas in the past they were kind of segregated to a degree. Yes, you could you knew where you were winning in search and could use that to inform your DSP strategy, but it was hard to really pair them together, especially for upper funnel. And now with AMC, you can do that to make sure that you're not oversaturating or cannibalizing one with the other, in addition to unlocking new audiences and that'll be incremental and help you grow your sales and market share.
Yeah, I
Um,
think Jason nailed it. When the two channels work together, that's where we consistently see the strongest long-term growth, right? We need to make sure the channels are speaking to each other.
um, and so we've talked a lot about audiences, but haven't drilled down into it. Can you walk us through, what that actually means?
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about where DSP reaches shoppers. Now let's talk about who we're actually targeting. So one of the biggest advantages of DSP is we're no longer limited to keywords. Instead, we can build audiences around shopping behavior. At Nectar, we generally think about four core audiences. The first is prospecting. So reach customers who are likely to be interested in your category but haven't interacted with your brand yet. The second is, competitor conquesting. These are shoppers who are actively engaging with competing brands. They've demonstrated, category interest. They're just purchasing from somewhere else today. And third is customer reactivation. These are previous purchasers who haven't come back. There's also users who have purchased your products prior or who have visited your product detail pages but haven't purchased. That's retargeting. These are, shoppers who viewed your products, added something to the cart, visited your store, or engaged with your brand but just didn't convert. Every mature DSP strategy uses some combination of these four audience types. The mix changes depending on your objectives, but together they allow us to really influence customers throughout the buying journey rather than waiting until they're actively searching.
Yeah, and you can get really creative. One of the big differences, or one of the big questions that comes up a lot is, should I run sponsored display or DSP? There's a lot more that you can do to get more granular with DSP versus sponsored display. For example, like exclusions. So you can layer exclusions over these audiences, which you can't do in sponsored display. So if you're selling a consumable, for example, you can exclude people who have purchased in the past 15 or 30 days, within the audience, or you can exclude people who have purchased competitors' products in a certain time window, so that you're reaching people who actually could buy in that time frame or in the time frame you want. So there's kind of an added power with DSP that it's not just the audiences. You can also layer exclusions to really dial the audience in.
Yeah, if you're and the same goes for, of course, if you have retargeting campaigns, you're targeting users who have viewed your products but not purchased. I think a lot of even more mature DSP campaigns I've seen is targeting users who are buying from competitors, but they're not excluding people who've actually purchased those products from competitors. If you're a supplement brand and you're selling vitamin C and you're targeting users who have viewed competitors' vitamin C product detail pages, you need to remember to exclude anyone who's recently purchased that, because if they've bought a 90-day supply of vitamin C, they're probably not going to be back in market to actually purchase for another 90 days or however long the look back window is. So make sure you're making use of your budget in a way that's strategic. And then the other piece is, just like Jason was talking about, leveraging audiences in DSP. Now Amazon has AMC audiences that you can actually leverage in search. So you can make sure that in search you can't really target by demographic. You can't really it's keyword based. But what you can now do is you can do a bid adjustment and a bid increase for anyone who's been exposed to your DSP campaigns, or you can put a bid adjustment for household income if you have an audience of users who are above a $200,000 household income on DSP. You can add a audience bid adjustment for anyone who's been exposed to that DSP campaign, knowing anyone exposed is over 200K household income. And then you can implement like a low base bid strategy. So say 20 cents for that keyword, meaning you're not really showing up, but then like a 900% increase on, certain terms if they've been exposed to a campaign that household income's above 200K, and you're willing to pay like $3 where you're probably going to show up. A little bit more advanced tactics, but it's definitely a way to manipulate how much you're spending on search and making sure you're only paying within search to reach the right audience.
Um, so one of the big benefits of DSP is going beyond Amazon, whereas sponsored, the suite of sponsored advertising tools are relatively limited in that regard. And to the extent you can offer Amazon, sorry, I can't speak today. To the extent you can advertise off Amazon with the sponsored products, brands, or display, the controls are quite limited, especially compared to the DSP. So can you walk us through, what you can use or where you can advertise and what might be a fit or might not be a fit for a brand when it comes to that
Yeah,
inventory?
yeah, I think we touched on this a bit. One of the biggest misconceptions I would say about DSP for brands that are just starting out is that, it's simply display advertising on Amazon. In reality, it's much broader than that. Amazon has, again, one of the richest data sets of shopping behavior, but shoppers don't spend their entire day on Amazon. They're streaming content, reading articles, browsing other websites, using mobile apps, watching live sports. DSP allows your brand to continue reaching the same shoppers across many of these environments. Think about how consumer behavior actually works. Very few people wake up and immediately start searching for your exact product. They discover brands gradually through multiple touch points. So maybe they see your ad, a streaming TV ad on Prime Video, and then a few days later they browse Amazon. Then they recognize your brand when they eventually perform a search. That's exactly why these additional touch points matter. It's introducing your brand across users really like daily lives outside of just within Amazon. Um, you know, they build familiarity before purchase intent fully develops. It's not about interrupting people everywhere they go. It's about creating enough relevant exposure that when they're finally ready to buy, your brand is already familiar. So streaming TV, Amazon has partnerships with like Netflix, Hulu, um, a lot of live sports events, WNBA, MLB, and then they have Prime Video, which they own. I would say the biggest limit for streaming TV is YouTube TV because it's owned by Google. But in terms of reach, it's going to be very similar in terms of other DSPs. Audio ads, Amazon has some podcasts that they technically own. They're expanding this heavily. You can, show up on podcasts or with audio ads. With podcasts, you can do, guaranteed buys where the podcast actually talking about your brand. Amazon homepage, you can do Amazon homepage buys. You can contextually target competitors' product detail pages with DSP ads. And then, the open web, Amazon extends reach to third-party sites and apps. So like you can be on ESPN.com, for example. There's not really much of a limit there.
Yeah, and kind of going back to what I said earlier, we talked to a lot of brands that, hey, I tried DSP 2 or 3 years ago, it didn't work too well. I would say that the quality of the inventory has improved dramatically over the past 18 months, let's call it, give or take 3 to 6 months. The partnerships with Netflix, Hulu, Amazon's really scaled its Prime Video offerings in the past year-ish or so in terms of adding a lot more shows and a lot more live sports. So and then their podcasting lineup has gotten a lot better too. They've brought on some really big names. So Amazon and that crosses owned inventory as well as third party. So in the past, the lot of the inventory uh, was either remnant inventories, kind of like leftover inventory from other sites, or just lower quality inventory in general. Whereas now Amazon is heavily invested, which has shown is reflected in their revenue, right? They went from nothing to 70 billion in revenue, Amazon ads, in just like 5-ish years, or 5 to 7 years. So yeah, it's a lot. It's a completely different ball game than it was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and I will say that you you don't necessarily have to be selling on Amazon in order to leverage Amazon DSP. They're really expanding their non-endemic offerings. A lot of non-endemic brands are going to use like Trade Desk or Mountain. You're not getting that Prime Video spots though, and also you're not able to leverage Amazon's really real-time purchase behavior signals. So really any brand can utilize Amazon DSP. It's not just for brands that sell on Amazon too.
Yeah, and that's a great point. A lot of Amazon for non-endemic brands, so brands that don't sell on Amazon, they're able to still tap into all the data that Amazon has on consumers, in addition to uploading their own hashed customer files. So there's essentially anonymized customer lists, and Amazon can marry that up and build lookalike audiences. Um, or a lot of non-endemic brands can use indicators about consumer purchase can use consumer purchasing habits or behaviors as indicators of a need for a product or a service. Um, a simple example could be like buying travel. If you're buying, suitcases, you might be going on a trip and you would need travel insurance, right? That would be a simple example where you could start to build audience. If you're a travel insurance company, you could build audiences off of people who have bought a suitcase in the past 30 days and advertise travel insurance. So that's very unique to Amazon. Mountain, Trade Desk, all the other DSPs don't have those type of hyper targeting capabilities and audience building capabilities. So it's a real game changer. And Amazon has expanded aggressively in the non-endemic space.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify that doesn't mean that you're limited to just Amazon audiences. Amazon does have partnerships with very large data providers. LiveRamp, for example, enables advertisers to look at their own first party data, but then there's like Alient provides transactional based data. You can use like MasterCard audiences of users who real purchase behavior not owned by Amazon. So like there's a lot you can do outside. They have third party audiences too.
Yeah, good call out. And even if you don't need quote unquote the product purchase behavior, you can still use all of those audiences and capabilities to leverage Amazon's DSP as a non-endemic advertiser. Um, so I guess, can you give us a little bit of a recap tying this all together?
Yeah, I would just say best strategies involve creating a cohesive strategy with sponsored ads and DSP. They should really work together. This might be my favorite slide just because it captures how we think about Amazon ads today and the funnel. We don't view DSP and sponsored ads as competing channels. They're solving very different problems. DSP typically sits further up the funnel, except for retargeting, which is going to sit at the bottom. Its job is to really introduce your brand to shoppers before they're actively searching. That could mean, again, reaching competitor buyers, category newcomers, previous customers who haven't returned. And then as those shoppers continue researching products, DSP helps keep your brand top of mind through additional touch points and retargeting. Eventually, many of those customers arrive back on Amazon and begin searching. That's where sponsored ads takes over. Sponsored products captures the demand that already exists. Another way to think about this is DSP helps create consideration. Sponsored product converts consideration into the sale. That's why we really recommend thinking about these channels independently. The strongest Amazon ad programs, they use, both intentionally because each one makes the other more effective. And there's a lot of Amazon Marketing Cloud reports that you can use to analyze the relationship between the two. You can analyze overlap reports to see what's the purchase rate of users who are exposed to DSP versus sponsored products. You can even get as granular as saying people were exposed to specific products through DSP or like different audiences or stages and different sponsored products or sponsored brands targeting types like branded versus non-branded. You can get very detailed here to see the overlap behavior. You can also look at path to purchase, see if someone's seen your ad on a streaming TV campaign, then they go to Amazon and buy. You can understand kind of the downstream impact of your DSP ads.
Yeah, there's really a lot you can do. So the other part that we haven't talked about today is creative. It's a huge X factor in the success of your DSP campaigns. Um, so we're kind of covering best practices here, but maybe also be helpful to break down the general creative types.
Yeah. I'll go through creative types. So there's display, there's online video, and then there's streaming TV. Display ads, you can have static custom images or static images where you're essentially adding the CTA and your logo and the imagery, it's kind of like banner ads like you would have for like Google display. But then there's responsive products where if you're selling on Amazon, Amazon will automatically create a responsive ad and responsibly size it for you. You can add your own logo and headlines to test, and it's going to create that CTA for you. You can also add a custom image where it's instead of just the Amazon product image, it's a lifestyle image. These typically are really good for lower funnel conversion-based campaigns because it's showing that, when you're clicking it, it brings you right to the product detail page and you're buying. I would say static images are better for awareness. Then there's online video and streaming TV. Pretty similar in terms of the creative that you need. 15-second spots, 30-second are typically the most popular. You can do 45 and 60 seconds too. The longer the video, typically a little bit higher the CPMs are. So those are the main, creatives you can really do. Then you can do, more advanced creatives like a Fire TV rotator, for example. I say search doesn't need creatives. However, that's not necessarily true anymore. Sponsored brand video, sponsored display video, custom images, sponsored product videos, even really all of your stages need creative at this point, including, your product detail pages to convert, but especially DSP, right? So creatives, one of the biggest differences between search and DSP. And DSP, you're not spending based off of interest. It's a fixed spend, right? So it's really unlimited spend. With sponsored products, the shopper's already looking for something. Product appears to answer a relevant question they've already asked. DSP is different. You're interrupting someone's browsing experience. That means your creative really has to earn their attention. It needs to communicate what your brand stands for almost immediately. It needs to answer one simple question. Why should I care? That doesn't necessarily mean flashy creative. In fact, some of the best performing DSP creatives are very, very simple. For example, UGC performs really well for some brands, but it could also mean strong imagery, a clear value proposition, easy to understand messaging. The important thing is making sure your creative matches the audiences that you're targeting. Someone who's never heard of your brand needs very different messaging than someone who's already viewed your product detail page twice this week. And you want to make sure that as you're engaging a customer at their first touch point, that it's consistent messaging throughout the funnel.
Yeah, those are great call outs. And I mean, Amazon also has a lot of third-party tools that allow you to measure and test creative pretty effectively and programmatically.
Yep. And I think that, we talked a lot about this, the DSP structure that really mirrors the funnel. I will say one mistake I see quite often is advertisers putting every audience into one campaign or one line item. That makes, optimization very difficult, but more importantly, it makes measurement almost impossible. Someone that's never interacted with your brand, who's buying from competitors, is going to perform completely different than someone who you're retargeting, who's had multiple interactions with your brand. It's going to be, typically going to cost a little bit more to engage and convert the customer who's never been exposed to your brand, but you're introducing a net new customer. We recommend separating campaigns based on objective. Prospecting campaigns should have their own budgets. Retargeting should have its own budgets. Loyalty should have its own budgets, and customer reactivation. The reason's simple: the audiences are going to behave very differently. They have different conversion rates. They also have different goals, and there's different signals that are going to help us analyze and understand if the campaign's successful. There's going to be, different expected ROAS, different frequency caps, different creative. By separating them, we gain a much better visibility into where customers' incremental growth is actually coming from. It also makes future budget decision much easier because you're investing based on what each audience is delivering instead of looking at, one blended number.
Yeah. Yeah. And we also see that a lot of people, or not a lot, sometimes these campaigns are set up incorrectly, which can make it hard to measure their effectiveness because you do need to measure them by different KPIs.
Yeah, and Amazon's also programmatic. So if you're separating out the budgets, Amazon's going to put the best performing audiences, they're going to prioritize that within the budget. So it's kind of optimizing itself in a sense. It can take a little bit. There's a 2-week learning phase. It's continuing to learn. I would say 90 days is really the sweet spot where the DSP's done what it needs to do, and it's kind of figured out its rhythm to reach the right users. But you want to make sure that your campaigns are properly segmented to do so. there's also a tricky issue there where you can over segment your campaigns. You don't want too many line items. So based on your budget, there's really different ways to set it up and best practices.
So getting into measuring success and setting expectations, a big question is how do I know whether DSP is working if I'm a brand?
Yeah, I think this is probably the question we get asked more than anything. How do I know DSP isn't just taking credit for sales I would have gotten anywhere or anyway? It's a fair question. Imagine a shopper sees one of your DSP ads on a Monday and then they don't click. And then on Thursday, they search for your brand on Amazon and purchase their sponsored products. Sponsored products receives that last click attribution, right? But would that search have happened if they hadn't seen the DSP ad earlier in the week? That's really the real question. Standard ROAS reporting doesn't answer that. That's why we focus on incrementality. We look at new to brand rate. We look at, we can run holdout tests. We separate previous customers from completely new acquisition. We look at, has the branded conversion rate increased? Or if you have abandoned cart ads, has your abandoned cart rate decreased, right? So are more users actually converting that have your products in their cart? You have to be very patient with DSP. You can, use early signals to adjust your targeting and make optimizations. But to answer that question, you really need about 90 days of data. We use various AMC reports to analyze the impact DSP upper funnel has on downstream conversions and really at what rate they're converting. The goal isn't simply providing, DSP generated sales, right? The goal is providing DSP generated sales that otherwise would not have existed. That's much higher standard, and it's also the standards executives should expect, but it can be difficult to measure. Using AMC, it makes that process much easier. I would say that using AMC, you're really able to analyze the impact upper funnel has on bottom funnel on Amazon better than any other programmatic advertising I've seen, because you're also getting that purchase behavior as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've done some other webinars on AMC that you can access, I think, on our website or YouTube channel. We've gone pretty deep on how to leverage AMC to measure the effectiveness of your DSP, create audiences, etc. And so, what are those KPIs that brands should be looking for? Obviously, it's unique to each brand and where they're at in their journey, so to speak. But is there any more kind of prescriptive guidance you
brand performance? We should be validating incremental lift through measurement. We should be, understanding which audience deserve additional investment and which ones don't. By this point, we're no longer guessing. We're making decisions based on actual customer behavior. The goal isn't just spending more, it's spending more effectively and efficiently. I will say that, when in the first 30, even 60 days, if you're running an upper funnel campaign, you're definitely not looking at sales. A lot of those users may have just started to purchase after seeing the ad, but it's not going to happen within a week. So we're looking at detail page view rates. Are our ads engaging enough to get users to land on the product detail page? Then are they coming back? Are they going to Amazon and searching for your brand, right? There's a lot of early success signals you can look at prior to the sale actually occurring to ensure that you're reaching the right users, they're engaged, they're a relevant audience, and likely they'll purchase down the line, right? So it's not just analyze the sale. I would say it takes about 90 days to really close the loop and effectively see how has DSP driven users down the funnel over the past 90 days, because it can take multiple touch points.
Yeah, and so that means looking at it as a whole. So not just evaluating the performance of the individual campaign, but rather how is that campaign affecting the account performance? And that's where you have to use AMC, because you're not going to be able to get that answer by looking at campaign data for DSP. Rather, you have to use AMC to marry up how DSP is impacting your overall sales performance. Right, and that's we talked about earlier about the missing link in years past that wasn't available. It really allows you to connect all the dots. AMC allows you to connect all the dots.
And as a, oh, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, just as a rule of thumb, generally speaking, sponsored ads, I would say over 70% of users typically convert after clicking a sponsored ad within the first really 7 minutes, 10 minutes. Um, it's the complete opposite. DSP, most users convert after being exposed 7 days later, after being exposed to upper funnel. So it's very, very different in terms of time to conversion too.
Yeah, and so we've talked a lot about Amazon Marketing Cloud in the interest of time. We'll go through this quickly, which is it's a clean room and it's anonymized, aggregated data that allows you to really understand how your campaigns are working together from cross-channel purchase, holdout, and incrementality. It allows you to do new to brand analyses, whereas vendors weren't able to do that at all, as well as customer lifetime value. So understanding at an ASIN level, where are customers dropping off in terms of cohorts when they buy, month one, month two, month three, when do they drop off? Um, and then audience overlap and frequency, really understanding that better. So there's a lot of Amazon Marketing Cloud is a really powerful connector uh, of data that allows you to really analyze your media mix and then optimize it, as well as build new audiences that are going to be more relevant. Or if you're a D2C brand, you can really understand better how Amazon impacts your D2C performance and vice versa. So there's a lot of different use cases. Again, we've done a couple other webinars recently on this with a much deeper dive. Anything that I kind of missed, Harriet, that you would add?
No, I think those are all really good points. If you're not using AMC, you really need to analyze DSP performance. It's for measurement and for advanced targeting capabilities too.
Yeah,
What
so we've talked a lot about the metrics, the timeline, but and you referenced executives earlier in terms of what they want to see. I think part of that is like, what is the roadmap, right? So here we've got an example outline of what to expect in month one, two, and three plus. Could you walk us through how to make sure you're properly analyzing the performance during the ramp up period?
Yeah, I talked to a lot of executives, and they need to understand DSP is not going to perform the same as we've mentioned. So um, essentially, one of the biggest mistakes I've seen advertisers make is analyzing DSP too early or expecting DSP to behave exactly like sponsored products, because it won't. First month is not about maximizing ROAS. It should be about building audiences, collecting enough data to understand how shoppers are responding. Um, because of that, the reporting naturally looks different. You might see lower last click ROAS, or you're most definitely going to. That's completely normal. What we're looking for instead is, detailed page view rate, increased branded search activity, improved conversions across the entire account. That's probably less weighted because conversions can take a little bit. And just really like looking at evidences that we're influencing future purchases. Think of DSP as investing in a future pipeline of customers rather than simply harvesting demand that's already there. Then during the second month, we've had about 30 days to 60 days of data. We're refining those audiences, beginning to gather statistically really meaningful performance data, making some light optimizations. Then by the third month, we finally have enough information to evaluate incrementality and purchase behavior, understand new to brand performance, and make smarter investment decisions. DSP, it's a learning system. It gets stronger and stronger as more customer signals accumulate. And if you're judging success after 2 weeks, you're almost certainly drawing conclusions before the data is mature enough. Once we reach that point, we need to decide which numbers actually matter, right? When brands evaluate DSP using only last click ROAS, that, they often are undervaluing the impact that it's having across the broader customer journey.
Yeah, yeah, and being patient can be challenging, but it's important. Um, so I think in the interest of time, we've generally covered these things, like we've said what to focus on and what not to do. So it's a good summary of just, not only making sure that you're setting it up correctly, that you're testing enough variables, audiences, and that you're giving it enough time and evaluating the right KPIs. Um, so you could quickly take us through the setup and first 30 days.
Yeah, I'll touch on it quickly. If you're just beginning with DSP, biggest recommendation is keep it simple. Don't rush the launch. You don't need to launch every audience Amazon offers day one. Start with clear objectives. Decide whether you're trying to acquire new customers, whether you're trying to reactivate previous buyers, defend existing customers, or increase awareness. Typically, I'm going to start, if I have a limited budget and I can't activate all, start with, a lot of the time I'll start with retargeting or very narrow audiences that I know is my target for testing, because I want to maximize what's going to, what we know is going to work first. Build a handful of well-defined audiences, and then establish your measurement framework before campaigns even launch. Then allow enough time for data to accumulate before making major optimization decisions. DSP is most successful when it's approached as a long-term customer acquisition strategy rather than a quick performance campaign.
Yeah. So these are some of the common questions that I think we've touched on. So I'm going to skip this for now, except for how much do we need to spend? I'll give a little bit more because that was one of the questions we got. It depends again on what you're doing. If you're doing retargeting, you probably get away per product with, $3,000 to $5,000. If the audience pool isn't huge, and yeah, so beyond that, it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, but you would probably need to spend more. But I think if you're going to be hard pressed to get to a certain degree, you need to maximize search before you invest in DSP. So I think that is more of the critical point you need to analyze as a brand, which is, are you starting to max out search? And we talked about that at the outset, and that's different based on your category, your position in the category, even down to a product level. But sometimes, you might be ready for DSP for certain products, but not for others. So it really depends. It's hard to give a one size fits all answer.
Yeah, I think 99% of brands can use DSP for the retargeting piece. If you're using sponsored display, you're limited in terms of exclusions. It's not a one size fits all. Brands spend, the most successful brands, like enterprise brands, will spend like anywhere from 10 to 50% on DSP. It's a very wide range. I would say if you're just starting out and you have a limited budget, start with 10%, start with 15%, like start lower. Even a 5K budget towards retargeting per month, and just start testing out what's working. And then, we can obviously help you develop what that budget is. It's just, you need to look at your search strategy and how it's performing.
And so we've talked about this in the interest of time here. I'm going to skip over the media mix. But yeah, I would say that, it's complex. And there are, one of the other questions we don't even have in this deck that we get a lot is, how do I get live on DSP? Essentially, unless you're spending $150,000 to $200,000 a month on DSP, you're not going to be able to get your own seat to run it at this time. I think eventually, as Amazon leans more into its automated tools like Performance Plus and Brand Plus, they will unlock at least some direct capabilities to use the more automated DSP tools. It's just my prediction, but otherwise you have to go through an agency like Nectar, but you can check the Amazon advertising registry. There's lots of agencies that provide managed DSP services. And if you're a smaller agency looking for help with it, there's authorized resellers. So yeah, today the landscape is you have to essentially go through an agency unless you're spending, at least 7 figures a year on DSP. But it is a really important part of getting to that next level and growing your market share, especially because Amazon itself is more invested in advertising. And so it's no secret that Amazon has become more pay to play over the past few years. And being invested in DSP is part of that. Harriet, any kind of parting advice or words for?
I would just say that, most brands and agencies and anyone's running DSP, doing effectively, they're going to have their kind of standard reporting metrics. And typically that's going to include Amazon Marketing Cloud. there are, based off your brand and your goals and the data that you really need, there's a lot that Amazon Marketing Cloud can do with like custom queries that aren't necessarily those templated queries in Amazon Marketing Cloud. And there's also, up until December 2026, Amazon has made some of the paid subscriptions free. So you can actually tie organic data to paid data sets. For example, you can look at the past 5 years. I can see on a product level what users came in new to brand from organic, but also versus paid, or like on a keyword level. That's data that we've never had before. Amazon's never released the organic piece. So they're more and more allowing us to connect not just sponsored ads and DSP, but how paid influences organic behavior as well. Custom queries, there's a lot you can do. If you're a CPG brand, we can understand at different discount rates, what's your drop-off rate for subscribe and save after one purchase, or how's your brand store impacting path to conversion. So there's just so much you can do. It's not just maybe the standard AMC reports you've heard about, but AMC is essentially, it doesn't have much of a limit. So if you want to understand a specific piece of your business and you're not sure how to get that data, there's a good chance you can actually build that data set within AMC. There's so much that's untapped there today.
Yeah. There's a lot here between DSP, AMC, harmonizing all three. And it's an exciting time to be in this space with all the development and these tools that are being rolled out. But I hope that you found this helpful today. We're really trying to provide actionable advice that brands can implement in their business to grow their sales, be more profitable, and grow market share. And if you have questions or need help with any of these topics or issues, please don't hesitate to reach out to us either directly via LinkedIn or on our website, which is thinknectar.com. Thanks for joining us today, and thanks for presenting, Harriet.
Yeah, thanks you guys so much.